Well, yay. Welcome, everyone. We have, I think, about 80 people signed up for this session. And so I see people hopping on. Welcome to the Memphis Story Breakout. This session or this breakout room is specifically for secondary, which we know are our middle schoolers and our high schoolers. I am Michelle Armstrong with the Pyramid Peak Foundation. Pyramid Peak is a place-based philanthropic organization here in Memphis that cares deeply about many of the topics that are addressed in this year's Eradicating the Odds conference. I am so honored to facilitate this session for two of my education giants, my education heroes, Jack and Yetta. Welcome. I hope you all get tired of hearing this, right? But it is such a privilege to have leaders like both of you in our city leading the educational outcomes for so many kids, the kids that you serve. I'll start with just a few follow-up questions for each of you from that larger conversation that we just saw with you all in the full panel. And then I'll jump in to let our participants ask questions. Before I do that, I'd love for you all to just say a couple words reminding us about your school communities, a few words in the way of introduction. Yetta, and then Jack.
Sure. Thank you, Michelle. I'm still fired up from the opening, so my energy is at a very high level now, which is great in a virtual setting. I am Yetta Lewis. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Gestalt Community Schools. We proudly serve over 2,500 students over 5 schools, K through 12.
I'm Jack Vulsteke. I'm the founder, executive director, and high school principal at Memphis Rise Academy Charter School. We serve grades 6 through 12. We have just over 760 students in building this year in those grades. And primarily we serve the Northeast Memphis community. So sort of the Raleigh, South Bartlett, and Grahamwood, Highland Heights, and Berkeley areas, north of Summer Avenue. And we have our permanent location out on Raleigh-LaGrange Road here in Memphis.
Well, great. Just a few questions from me to get us warmed up. And I know this audience is not shy, and so we'll definitely have a lot of time for the audience to get in. Yetta, you talked about the well-being pilot that you've launched across your network of schools, Gestalt Community Schools, and gave a few examples about how the entire school community has been involved and has benefited. So not just to focus on SEL for kids, but really like the whole community. I heard you reference therapeutic painting and learning to de-stress through breathing exercises. What are some of the other examples of how your entire school community engages in social emotional learning and health, specifically as we think about our middle and high school students and their families?
Yeah, so for the pilot, and I call it a pilot, but we had exposure for everyone in the school community. We had 3 buckets. One was around awareness, where we shared just small video clips around topics such as setting boundaries, coping, breathing. And those videos were 90 seconds or less with a call to action. They were texted out to every family. And we were very mindful of not using triggering language, like calling it therapy or mental health or anything like that, that could be triggering for our Black and Brown communities with labeling. So that first bucket was around awareness, which everyone was involved in, that got these weekly emails. And we got a lot of great response from that. Hey, I didn't know that, or maybe I'll try that at home. That second bucket was the activities that you talked about, which are really authentic activities that the family can participate in together. So we had these virtual sessions that would take place Wednesday afternoon or Saturday morning, where families can hop in. And we were so pleased that our staff also participated with their children. So this authentic approach, and some of those activities included yoga and journaling and as you said, therapeutic painting. We also did some self-talk, this positive affirmation that was important. And then that last bucket was around more therapeutic work. So with each session that our families participate, that our scholars and the adults in their life that were willing to, there was always a reflection at the end, like, how are you going to use this? Did you find this useful? And it was just our sneaky way of getting the therapeutic work in. And anyone who needed more therapeutic work, whether individually or family, we had partners here in Memphis that would offer that to them. And many of the families, as they became comfortable with us, as we build this container of trust, said, you know, I need a little bit more therapy. Maybe it's family therapy. And we just call them self-reflection sessions.
I love it. So sounds like a lot of what you did in schools actually created a bridge for families to connect to services, you know, when and where needed.
Right, without a stigma attached to it.
Love it. Jack, you shared a lot about how the work you're leading at Memphis Rise is starting from a place of humanism, right? And purely building on trust. You talked about advisory as a structure within your school that helps to facilitate building trust. Can you share more about like how advisory is structured, how it works, what are students and adults gaining as part of it? And then how do you see this really supporting kids because you have a middle and high school? Is this a structure that starts in middle school and is built out through the secondary experience?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, for starters, I think I would say that advisory suffices for us, and it is 6 through 12. It looks different in 6th grade than it does in 12th grade, but it is a fundamental piece of what we do on a day-to-day basis and in an annual basis with students at each grade level. But it suffices for us something that is, I think, an essential of all schools at this point, not just returning from the pandemic, but just generally understanding what students value in school. And that is that it kind of is the vessel for, mutual emotional and human availability for students and staff, such that, it doesn't have to be an advisory program, but I think that there needs to be something static in a school setting that humanizes the environment and allows for human availability to be a priority during the day. That is, sort of devoid of academic pressures, and is instead, it's challenging to do so, but I think is strategically structured to create opportunities for human connection in an authentic way that also sort of follows the gradient of the developmental curve for a student from 6 through 12. And of course, we sneak things in there too, that are productive. Obviously that's a space where we'll have sort of check-ins with kids around things that they've reported to us over the course of time that are goals for themselves, inside school, outside of school, help them develop resumes and things like that. And that's a good place for those things that otherwise don't necessarily fit in a bucket during the day. But those are humanizing experiences as well, where you're coaching and mentoring a student towards things that are designed for self-betterment. But the primary purpose of our advisory and why it exists every day and why we hold the sanctity of the time so much is to essentially establish points of connection, but in 3 different lanes: peer-to-peer connections. So students to get to know each other through structures and activities, things of that nature, in a way that humanizes the kids in their classroom, the kids in their grade, the students they would otherwise see in their social lives, but in a way that is positive and promotes the value of each person. Obviously, teacher to student, which we see our advisors in truest form as that, which is the ability to getting to know the student from an authentic place, and then advising them on how to grow towards the sort of stimuli in their life that are most valuable to them, as well as how to avoid things that maybe might catch them on the way to those goals, and be active mentors on a cyclical basis for them on with some structures that we've designed in-house and have learned from best practices of other schools. And the third piece is, I guess, inherent within the other 2, but it's also peer to group. So what is your role in middle school? Advisories are static. In high school, advisories are a little bit more fluctuant, but what's your role in that community? It sort of serves as a microcosmic community that is a smaller part of a larger whole. And how do you provide, value in that community? How are you perceived in that community? And how can you communicate in a productive way in front of a group, or, practice participation in a way in advisory that models what you would do outside of school or in everyday life, how you should speak about yourself, your identity, your self-worth, and your confidence, and things of that nature. And that's, it requires a certain degree of vulnerability that's built over a course of time to get students to really do that. But those are some of the goals that we also have a community meeting structure, especially in middle school, that, sort of expands that to an all grade concept. Those are some of the goals that we have in advisory. But I think honestly, it goes back to the idea that I've worked in and seen schools that don't possess the vessel for that human relational connection time. And for us, we've established it and tried to guide it to where it can be relevant at all grade levels, because the need, no matter what age level of the student it is, the need is inherently there all the time. It just needs to ensure that it follows the trend lines of what students value and what they need, in terms of how they are emotionally grappling with that level of their development at that time. Yeah.
I love it. I can only imagine that, the advisory piece is really helping to create a strong sense of belonging on so many levels with students. And that's what we know builds confidence, that builds all the other things that, help students do well academically. And so we are going to turn to our amazing audience now. We have so many friends. I can see your names. I can't see your faces. Unfortunately, we can't turn the cameras on so that we can see your faces, but we can definitely bring you into the space with your questions. We'll answer questions. I'd love for you to shoot them to us in the chat. Chandler, I see you. Yes, that human connection is so powerful. Please, at this time, share your questions. I'll field them, Yetta and Jack, just to help you so that you aren't managing the chat as well. Audience, if you have your questions, and I know we are not shy, let me jump in with one more while folks are warming up. How about that? And then, the teacher in me will cold call, so I do see names, okay? Yetta, you talked about some of your partners. You mentioned some of your local partners. And because I know you, I know a few of them, but I'd love for you to share who you're working with both locally and if they're national partners that are helping you bring, this vision of, you talked about being known, loved, and educated as sort of the pillars of the work. Who are your partners and how do they help you?
Yeah, so we always are looking for thought partners in this work. And a part of this known, loved, and educated, we're working with the intersection of SEL and DEI. So a lot of work around belonging, identity, self-worth, and self-efficacy. And one of our primary partners on the national level has been Transcend Education, and really having us unpack the DEI work, a lot of affinity groups and really talking. I love the discussion about asking the students what they want, and they want to know more about themselves and their community. And so, we're working that into this whole idea of wellness, that you start with your self-care as well. Another partner locally is Sweetgrass. Sweetgrass does therapeutic work. They also help you to design some of the SEL work within your school building. And then University of Memphis is also a great partner with the School of Social Work. And we're really focusing on kind of taking what we thought we had for SEL curriculum and turning it around on its head around this true, authentic family approach that creates a cultural identity for students as well. So those are some of the main ones. And I can't forget, I think one of our biggest partners this year in our learning are our parents. Our parents have just been champions around the focus group, some really messy conversations that have been intense, that have elevated our thought. We even said, maybe we should call it SEL. It's elevating it to just a really personal level so far.
Thanks, Yetta. I hear Dina Simmons in my head as you're saying, get close to the people, get proximate to understand what they need. So we do have questions rolling in, and how about we start with Jack? So the question, and thank you, Benjamin, I see your question. What's been helpful in trying to reach older students who might be struggling, but are not used to sharing or being vulnerable at school? So breaking the shell, pulling down those things, and you mentioned stigmas, right, Yetta? So Jack, what are some things that have been helpful to help our older students?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of asking students to participate in a vulnerable way, for us, it's a little bit of an interesting, it's like sort of difficult to answer that question because we don't really teach seniors cold or older kids cold. They've been with us for a long time. So by the time they reach those upper grades, close to post-secondary life, they've been with us in a lot of cases since sixth grade. So we've started to break down some of those vulnerability barriers earlier. But in certain cases, when we, for example, like backfill a student in 10th grade, I think about that, I think it's important to not, force a student into what your vision for their, sort of participation in your model is at first, because the things that they're grappling with go beyond what your expectations are from a social and emotional standpoint. In some cases, especially, as people who have worked with older students know, there is that sort of stark differential between when a student is leaving 8th grade and entering 10th grade. There's a massive change in the dynamics of their values outside of school, and it's usually corroborated by family narratives. We see those changes happen, and they themselves, going back to what Yetta was saying a second ago, they themselves want to kind of figure out, okay, if I am sort of perceiving myself as a young adult, then what does that actually mean for myself? Because I'm starting to make decisions for myself, and that can be complex, and there can be, sort of a rejection of, intervention and things of that nature. So first and foremost, we don't want to establish an archetype for what that looks like for an older student, because that can lead to just a general deflection of any sort of trust in the concept of vulnerability. I certainly think there's no science to that. One thing I would suggest that we often use as sort of a tool in the toolkit for getting students to participate is leaning into relationships that they organically and authentically consider strong already. And that usually is not necessarily like their brand new science teacher. It might be a social relationship or something of that nature that they already maintain, and partnering those people together so that, for the first time that a student is expected to sort of like present in a vulnerable way or give an answer to an opinion-based question that requires some depth, is after doing so in conjunction, writing it out or working on a project or talking it out with somebody that they organically would otherwise talk to, and establishing something where they're going to co-present. Right. So they might have to lean, a little bit on each other, but that the discussion's already been had, and it's already been had in sort of a way that feels comfortable to the student. And then if you say, can you guys talk about what you discussed in between each other, that discussion already occurred, and it breaks the seal to a certain extent for a student to see, participation in a vulnerable way. When I see somebody that I care about or that I trust already doing it, and then I tried it for the first time, kind of mirroring that, and was validated in the setting, we see that be successful. So sometimes it's not the teacher coaching, older student to do so, but lean into their relationships that they already see as okay for their own vulnerability, and then try to uplift and validate their participation in that way. And we see that have some success in things that, we might otherwise expect students that have that comfort already to be, naturally ready to participate in.
Love it, Jack. And you have to be positioned to know students. And to your point of, known being, noticing and knowing students, you have to know students to be able to do that. Thanks for that question, Benjamin. Audience, I am jumping around in the chat. Crystal, I see your question. Crystal, welcome. Our other friends from Freedom Prep. Crystal's question is, what type of training do you do with teachers who are not Black and brown? And can tread the line of telling Black and brown students how to feel or what it is to be normal. So we're always creating these cultural bridges in different ways in schools. I think that's what I'm hearing Crystal's question too.
Yeah, those cultural norms sort of sneak in. And so part of that work is doing work around your own biases. And sometimes people do not really recognize their bias, both racial and economic, that they're applying to our students. But we had a commitment first this year of building affinity groups where there was a comfort level with your affinity group to discuss, and now bringing in a more mixed group of approach. But, having the grace and space that people are going to, in these sessions, have a tremendous amount of fear and anxiety, kind of name that. And personally, for me as a leader, I had to model my vulnerability and my biases and kind of put them out open so that other folks could feel comfortable. So that was the first part. And the other was name it. Like when it comes up, we are really quick at naming it, but not naming it with the point of finger or judgment. Like, hey, you just used some language that was really oppressive or, microaggressive. And you may not even know that. And so we're really big on the language that we use with each other and with our students. And that's that first step in that process. We're still learning on what we need to create and develop for teachers. We've done some book studies, and I will say not very successful, right? What we had in mind shifted when you're in front of folks, and you can kind of now have this compliant checklist around anti-racism that actually becomes the antithesis of what you want to do. So we're very much engaging people in what they need and understanding everybody needs something different in this space.
How would you respond, Jack?
Yeah, I would really agree that I think anti-bias conversations to start the year, that leaders all the way to brand new employees are sort of mutually connected in a sense. There's no hierarchy, because bias is a universally human thing, and sort of I agree with what's going on in the chat as well, which is developing sort of a common language and common commitment to like checking it. And sometimes it's very difficult for educators to look at a situation where that they have lived and taken a subjective opinion on, and then looked at it and said, objectively, what I've done the same thing, again, twice, or done the same thing if a student of a different race or ethnicity was involved, or done something where I had no background for the student versus I had developed an archetype for that student from what I watched in the hallway last year. So we start the year with some norming exercises to take, as much of the subjectivity out of, your reactions to things, and try to name, what would be your reaction to this case based on either whether it's the school's toolkit or some of your beliefs and values, and then ground some of our responses for the year, and if this is the case, these are common situations that we're going to find ourselves in as educators. If it was the case, regardless of circumstance, try to ground ourselves within boundaries that would be cross-applicable regardless of, subjectivity, and then being ready to, check that. And as the year gets away from us, and things feel more subjective, recognizing that sometimes that subjectivity is, bias speaking its way out. And so but I would agree with everything Yetta said as well. Clearly, I think, we, as a school, we consider that to be an area of growth for ourselves. And I think some of the things that she was mentioning there are definitely principles we ground ourselves into.
Yeah, I hear Dina in my head again. It's the work that we're always doing. We can't check that box, right? I also think about some of the resources she shared, and hope that our friends who are working close to schools, school adjacent organizations lean into those. So audience, we are close to time. I'm going to try to get 2 more questions in. You all are on fire in the chat. David Hill, I see you. David's question, Yetta, is what would you call SEL if you don't call it that? He talks about the power of language, which is real. So
yeah,
what?
I don't know. We're learning what the trigger words are.
Yep.
And so we have this thought around this whole idea of the betterment of your life, skills to thrive and survive, but we're not sure where we're going to come out with that. I actually think the focus group with the high school students are producing the most, SEL is a teacher term. So they're like, oh yeah, you're doing a wellness check, or this is our Thrive session, or this is our identity session. So they're calling it different things. So we're listening to their language to figure out, what do we call it?
I love it. Yetta and Jack, I want to say it again. Both of you are in a short list of my education heroes. I thank you all so much. The producer has given me the chat note to wrap it up. And so audience, I hate that I didn't get to many of your questions. We have the rest of the day. We have tomorrow, and Yetta and Jack are right here in Memphis. And so we can always get proximate. This is about community. This is about learning together. Thank you for this time. Our next session is our journal and reflection room session. Audience, I would love for you to use this jam space to really talk about your impressions so far, the questions that remain, anything that is bubbling up for you in the way of action. Like, please name that in this reflective space that we'll all be able to see. To leave this session, click the leave button at the bottom of your Zoom application. And then to find the next session, return to your browser window with the Expo Pass platform. From the schedule in Expo Pass, lots of instructions, you'll find that join button, which will send you to the journal space. Again, Yetta and Jack, thank you for all you do and service to students in our great city. Bye, everybody.